Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Angry Cast on Fallout Shelter 2022. How y'all doing? We have got a lot of stuff going on, but mostly it's just going to be quests, of course, because we are still trying to get through the long slog of training up our peeps to get them to level 50 and to get all their perks. But for now, let's get out there and do this stuff. So, I have been, of course, reporting back to you from the world of television, things I get to watch, things that I notice, and I spent the last few days watching a docuseries on industrial light and magic called, of all things, Light and Magic. Now, you can find it on Disney Plus, of course, and it tells the story of how Industrial Light and Magic, the special effects, the visual effects house that was created back in the 70s, became the driving force in the change of how filmmaking is done. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but it's just amazing to me that it has been that long, and some of these people that I grew up watching, in behind the scenes stuff, what they look like today. Now, there's a Netflix series called The Movies We Love, which went into the behind the scenes on a lot of the great movies I grew up with, and Home Alone, Dirty Dancing, Ghostbusters, Die Hard, all that stuff, and they do one on Jurassic Park. And a lot of the things I learned on that, when I've talked about before, when we talked about Jurassic World, Fallen Dominion, but it was just reinforced, and I apologize, I'm going to make a correction later on, but it just reinforced the stories that were told during that episode of that series. So let's take you all back 40 plus years. It's early 1970s. George Lucas is a young college, basically high school student who's about to fail out, and he ends up going to USC, and he starts to become a filmmaker, and he wows everybody with student films. One being THX 1138, which becomes actually released at the box office, and he's friends with other young guerrilla filmmakers at the time, Steven Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola, and they formed him and Coppola formed American Zoetrope Films to do some of the movies that they wanted to do, and then it just didn't happen. So they said, okay, go out and do a comedy, so you can do that. And of course, George releases American Graffiti, and it gets acclaim for being a slice of life from the 50s, and cars and relationships and mores of teenagers in Southern California in the 50s, and it's well received. So he's like, okay, now I got a little bit of cred behind my back, I can go out and make a film I want to make a film about. And he starts talking about making this sci-fi space opera called Star Wars, or at that time, The Star Wars. And he finally gets backing from 20th Century Fox, and they send him to Europe, to London, and to Tunisia to do the filming, and he's got all these visual effects he wants to see done, because of course it is space, and there's spaceships and laser swords and all kinds of stuff, and he needs to have the ability to do that. And he decides to get some people back in LA area to handle all the visual effects. Well, that's just all well and good, but he's asking them to do things that they had never done before in filmmaking. He gets John Dykstra, who then hires out a bunch of other people, like some of the people that you may not have never heard of before, but John Dykstra is a huge one in the filmmaking industry back in the 70s. So you had John Dykstra, you've got Dennis Muren, you've got Richard Edlund, you've got Joe Johnston, you've got Ken Ralston, all these people, and Phil Tippett. You've got all these people who grew up making home movies with stop motion, and they're they're action figures in the backyard, and just all kinds of different Super 8 movies when they were growing up. And now they've all got the chance to work on a big budget picture. And it's their dream. And they all sort of find each other throughout. I know a guy that can do this guy knows a guy that can do that, and they all bring them together and put them into a warehouse in Van Nuys. And they start thinking about how they're going to do this. Now, traditionally, when you're doing this model building and filming, you would make the model and then you would move the model, like either stop motion or on wires or something like that, to film the motion of these things. But in this idea, a lot of these are space shots where there is a fixed light source. So there's a fixed light source it's basically the sun of whatever galaxy you're in or solar system you're in, and there's no way for that for you to move the object without changing the light, because you have a smaller, very much smaller light source in a room that is lighting that object. So when you move the object, you have to move the light too. So they develop motion control systems, which is basically that you attach or affix the ship or the model or whatever you're going to film to one point, and then you move the camera around it. And then, of course, you have to do it several passes exactly the same way with precision, because you're going to be using techniques like, not rotoscoping, but I think maybe rotoscoping might be one of it, or, your background plates, or just compositing, where you're taking pieces of one pass, which is just the background, and then you're going to be adding in pieces of the foreground, which is a pass with the ship in it. And you have to have those things match, otherwise you're going to notice this herky-jerky motion from the different objects. Because back then they used actual film, where they had to take the same piece of film 4 or 5 times and then put them on top of each other to create a new one. Which is kind of like film compositing. The whole blue screen, green screen started back then. So they decided that if they made a motion control camera, that they could do the exact same passes over each frame and keep the ship in the foreground stationary, it could look like motion. So a lot of the ship scenes you see in Star Wars, especially like the opening blockade runner with the Star Destroyer chasing it, is those ships aren't moving. They are stopped. They are just sitting still, attached to a beam or something like that that's covered with whatever material that they use to block out, the blue or the green. And then they just move the camera slowly across the floor, pulling back and revealing both the ships. And of course they add in the laser shots later on, and the music and the background. So these are early techniques that became revolutionary for filmmaking. But they were very disorganized. They had a lot of parties. They spent most of their time building the process on how they were going to do that. So you weren't just making a movie, you were also making a company as well. You had a budget to film a movie, but in order for you to do the visual effects, you had to create the visual effects process of this motion control camera, which they called Dextraflex. And all of that had to have been done, and they had to get that all done in time. So George, having trouble in Tunisia, of course, if you know anything about the history of Star Wars, all the filming trouble that they had overseas, he comes back and he sees we've got 2 shots. We've got the we've got a gun on the surface of the Death Star firing a laser, and we've got like one other shot, and that's it. And he's like, I need to do 30 or 40 more, and this is all you've done. And he's like, we're wasting money. And there's this huge fights and all this other stuff. There's threats to fire John Dykstra, and everybody's just like, I don't know what we need to do. Like, we're working 18-hour days. We're staying here overnight. We're building all this stuff. I don't know what else we can do. So George brings in a couple of other people to handle organization and administration. And finally, they get themselves to a point where they know how to organize their work and do the scheduling of shots, and they get it done. And of course, we all know the rest is history. Star Wars is a huge success, to which now we've got this group of people that are very talented. And what do you do with them? Because we're done with the movie. Well, they're going to do a sequel, but in the meantime, they're working on other things like Battlestar Galactica and Star Trek and all these other things. So it starts to sow the seeds of a company for hire for special effects around the industry. So George comes back and they're going to do Empire Strikes Back, and they don't they're going to move everybody up north from LA, from Van Nuys area, up to San Francisco, to Marin County, and build everything up there to get him out of LA, to get him, and he's got the money. He's going to pay for all this stuff to be done because he's got mad money from Star Wars now, and he retained the licensing of the merchandise, which was the smartest thing he did. And he goes to do all this, but he doesn't bring everybody with him. He starts to shave off the people that he doesn't feel are helping the process. One of them being John Dykstra, which is kind of a shitty thing, but there was a lot of the type of attitude and the type of ways to do things that weren't gelling between the two of them. So he makes that decision, and he doesn't bring John Dykstra, but he brings out Dennis Muren and Ken Ralston and Phil Tippett, and I forgot one of the greatest matte painting artists, Harrison Ellenshaw. And a lot of these people had ties to the industry through their family or through other industries that would sort of create this sense of mechanical ingenuity and whatnot. And that's now they've got this company that they got to form, and they call it Industrial Light and Magic because it was built in a warehouse. They're doing industrial work, model making, all that stuff, and they're using light and magic to make film. So now they're going off and they're doing Empire Strikes Back, and of course that's even a bigger box office success. And now it's become, well, I've got 3 more years before I do another movie, and I figure, well, I don't want to lose these people because they're creative talent. So I'm going to just tell my friends, if they have films that they want to do and they need special effects, you can use Industrial Light and Magic, for a small fee, of course. And so now he's created this for-hire company. But it's always been this case of where Industrial Light and Magic was formed to create the process by which George Lucas could bring his vision to film. And it never was good enough. It was he was almost there. He's I can see all the things that we need to do and all the things that we can do, but we got to get that to reality, and it just never gets there. They go from editing in the studio where it's just film reels just flying on the floor and saying, I want to have this shot, I want to reuse this something, or I want to go find something, and you have to dig through piles of film that's been cut on the floor to go back and splice into the rest of your film. And he wants to get away from that. He wants to do things digitally and edit and all that other stuff, and he's just got all these ideas that are just insane because it's such a paradigm shift from the way movies are made. But he knows that it's the way that he can get what he wants done, and he knows it's the way that will actually advance the industry and doing the things that we see today, that we take for granted today. So now you've moved from the first couple of episodes that dealt with all of the Star Wars stuff onto the 3rd and 4th episode, which deals with them doing other things and honing their skills and creating new things. And a lot of it's just well, I know you think you can't do it, but what if you tried? What if you just thought about it? And a lot of times that ingenuity, that all right, I'll figure this out, that leads to the invention of new techniques. And if you watch those movies today, you sort of see that there is such a finesse to the way that works, but it was hard back then. It was those things didn't exist. The shots that you see in Empire Strikes Back weren't done before. I mean, we had Harryhausen films that, the Voyage of Sinbad and all that stuff where it was stopped in Clash of the Titans, but it wasn't done the way they did it, and they improved upon the process. I mean, the whole entire movement of the AT-ATs or the AT-ATs and the Snowwalkers going across Hoth, that was all sort of revamped into to a way that made sense for them to actually fly things down through the set. And how they did it. Now, they would move the shot, and then they would take the camera pass through it. Now, it's how do you do that where you have to move a model every frame, however many frames per second, but you have to move the model each shot, but you have to have a camera flying through there because they're going to go through the legs with the snowspeeder. All that stuff. It was insane. So they start bringing on more people to hire out, to build out some of these, prop departments and model departments, and this new computer and graphics department that sort of becomes somewhat of a novelty that slowly begins to creep into all the other areas of the business. And then you've got this, and then there's this offshoot of this guy named what's his name, Ed Catmull, who's from Salt Lake City, who has this idea about using a computer to make computer-generated graphics. Back in those days, it's what are you talking about? Now it's oh yeah, big deal, I can do that with Photoshop. And That becomes later, actually. But he starts bringing them in, and they start doing these things where they can make all these effects on the computer, and they start to put those things to add into the process, and then they get that in house and have this thing called the Droid Edit, or I'm sorry, Edit Droid, where it just this digital process for film editing and all that, and it spawns a computer that they can sell to people for commercial cells to do all this. It's called the Pixar. Well, eventually they realize that they've got this thing, but it's not really profitable. They don't have to do with it. It's got all this stuff, and there's all this needed to flesh that out. So Lucasfilm sells off Pixar to Steve Jobs, which we all know where that ends up. You can just see it's like, man, what's going on here? Like this entire situation. And then they get to like the mid '80s, and we've got young Sherlock Holmes, which presents us with the first ever computer-generated character in the stained glass window knight that attacks, and that becomes a huge thing for filmmaking and computer-generated graphics. And then, of course, along comes the Abyss, and now we've got how are we going to do this with? We've got to have a character, a full character that's water, that's fluid. We've done stop motion before, and we could do that with clay, but it's still going to have ridges. And how do you project the the light and the water and the texture, like the texture behind the column and all that stuff? Well, at that point, they had brought in this guy who had graduated, and actually, when he was a teenager, was in California with his family, and went to tour ILM and Van Nuys, and actually, thought he was there for a job interview. He's just there to get a tour. They end up hiring him back later on. His name's John Knoll. Him and his brother start working on something together that actually sort of feeds into what John's doing while he's working for Lucasfilm or an ILM. And he's like, can we take and move pictures or edit pictures, for a movie and color them in here and do all this stuff. And he's like, well, I think I could write a program for that. And they end up doing that for a commercial application, and it ends up being Adobe Photoshop. So Adobe Photoshop sort of ties into how they did The Abyss, where they take the set and they turn it into like a fold out, like a cube, that they fold out all the parts of the cube, all of the surfaces, and then they enclose, like they box it up, and then they put their the water column inside of that, and then they composite it into the shot. Now they also have to program into the computer where the cameras are going to be versus where the cameras are going to be in real life, all that stuff, so they can digitize all this. And it becomes amazing. It becomes a world-changing thing, because once you've got the Abyss, then you can go and do Terminator 2 and the liquid, the T-1000. And just now we're getting away from the model making, and there's no more Star Wars. This is all the late 80s, early 90s. We're talking like 87 to 91. There's no Star Wars. There's none of this other stuff. I mean, they've done Willow, which was what they called morphing, where they took puppets created to look like one animal, or half of one animal and half of another animal, or an animal and a human, and they sort of have these motorized puppets that they would do, and then they would take and use that to map into the computer and then go between them. So the whole Finn Rizal scene where she's being transformed from a goat into a 75-year-old, powerful wizard, looks just seamless on camera for Ron Howard. So again, being farmed out, being profitable as a company, always adding technology and becoming more and more advanced, to the point where now we're in the late 90s, and once we've got the Abyss done, then comes Steven Spielberg wanting to do Jurassic Park. And Jurassic Park, of course, turns everything on its head, because now instead of just having a stop-motion dinosaur running across the screen that's attached to an arm that they have to block out, you can have dinosaurs who are free-floating in any space, doing whatever they want, fully rendered in CGI, and they look real. And this is what sends Bill Tippett almost into, to his death, because he's like, it was going to be the Phil Tippett show. Jurassic Park was going to be all stop motion. It was going to be all Phil Tippett doing the dinosaurs. And I've seen the mock-ups, and they really weren't that bad considering. But they thought, hey, we're going to just do, Phil's going to do all of the stop motion with the dinosaurs. The guys they hired, which is Steve Spaz Williams, and I forget the guy's name. Oh my God, I'm horrible at this, but this other guy who's like, he was like a rock guy with glasses, and they were thinking, well, they were going to just be brought in to do the touch-ups to make it look more real than it really was. And they said, well, let's try it. And they sort of ambushed the directors and the producers and the studio, and showed them this little thing that they've done. Like, oh my God, we can do this now. Let's do it. And then, but you think Phil Tippett's done, the model shop's done. He's the dinosaur whisperer. He's there to teach them how the dinosaurs need to move. Like, you guys can put it up on the screen. I'm going to make it come to life. And, that's great. And if you haven't seen, Phil Tippett worked on a movie for 30 years called Mad God, I think. It's just got released. It's a fully stop-motion animation film that has taken 30 years to make, and I highly suggest going and watching it, because this is what real craft was like back in the 70s. And even today. And guerrilla filmmaking and all that. So anyways, now we've got Industrial Light and Magic has just created the first CGI, fully CGI entity that's not motion capture of a person. It's motion capture of a puppet or an animatronic, and then fully rendered into, and everything. And that's just, now the world is different. And now George Lucas sees that he can go back and make the movies he wants to make, which are the prequels. And you can see the shift, because not everybody from those days, the Ken Ralstons, the Harrison Ellenshaws, and the Dennis Mirans and all them, not all of them end up going forward. Like, once Jurassic Park is done, the model shop and everything is just sort of like shuttered. It's like everybody left. I mean, you started to lose people along the way for whatever reason, but this was kind of like the nail in the coffin for them. And it's sort of sad, because I grew up with those films. I grew up with those techniques. I grew up, watching them bring to life. How did they do that? How did they, is that a painting? Is that I mean, it's just like that. Part of that experience of me going to see a movie back then was just trying to figure out, or just accepting that they created something beautiful that doesn't exist in real life. And now that's all gone, because now it's like, oh, they just use a computer to do that. None of it's breathtaking anymore. None of it's like, there's no new ground to tread when they're making a film. So now you're back to story, and we can't even do that right. But I kind of looked at it and I said, wait a second, hold on everything. And now you see, like, The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian, I just learned, I didn't know this. The Mandalorian, a lot of those sets aren't real, and they're not put on the background later on. There's like a 360-degree screen or multiple projectors or multiple monitors that they make an entire environment out of, and then they film in front of it. And so they can film the entire process start to finish, and you can react to what's in the background, whereas before you just stood in front of a green screen. Oh, look, there's a sunset. Now you've got the entire process happening live. And there's one scene where they're like in talking to somebody, and they're like, oh, I thought you weren't going to build any new sets. He's like, what are you talking about? That's just a desk. The entire surround is all computer generated, but on this thing called the Volume, which is like this 360-degree set of screens. And it's amazing to me that that's the way we can do things nowadays. Like, we knew what a cyclorama was growing up. It was just that big, huge, long backdrop in the back that ran around the corners of the wings of the stage. And here, now you've got 360 degrees of environment that you can just put up whatever you want and act in front of. But I looked at it and I saw, well, okay, the prequels came out of this. And then I started to think, this is what the amazing thing was. Like, wait a second. I just realized what the prequel trilogy is. The prequel trilogy is George Lucas, a.k.a. the Emperor, creating a company, a.k.a. ILM, in order to advance the technology and advance the filmmaking industry and become profitable enough so that he can go back and make, ILM being the Clone Army, to go back and make the movies he wants to make, and then utterly turn the film industry into this giant monopoly that just oversaturates the market with CGI films and just money-making opportunities. Disney owning Marvel and Star Wars and all these other things, and just all of this. It's not a metaphor. I don't know what the actual terminology for it. It's the story. ILM is the story of, and the prequels are the story of how Disney takes over the world of the film industry. Like, oh my God! And the Jedi, of course, are the old guard, the Dennis Murans, the Richard Edlunds, the Phil Tippett's, the John Dykstras, the Harrison Ellenshaws. They're like the ones that get left in the past because the clones are taken over, and now you have the Empire, which is Disney, threatening anybody who tries to take their market share of the films out there. It's kind of scary when you think about it. And I get the idea that we had to go in that direction. The digital filming, digital projectors, digital everything, there's the loss of fidelity of everything. I get all that, but some of that is just, some of that's needed. Some of that you need to have that. I don't think that filmmaking has to be a archaic process. I think you can use all those things to enhance it. And I get it that at the end of the day, it's the story. You have to have a good story to tell. The filmmaking process by which you tell it with is where you bring it to life. But at the heart of it, you have to have a great story. But giving everybody these tools allows you to become lazy with how you do it, because that was one of the things about growing up, when I was a kid, is that we didn't have all the toys. We had to make our own things. We had to make our own sets. We had to make our own, the imagination played into it. The woods became our Endor and all that other stuff. And it's just those types of things that we didn't have growing up. And now we don't have to do that. We can just go on Gary's Mod, or we can go into like a Unity engine that, that we own a piece of, and Roblox and all those things. And we don't have the creative process in our brains to make these things happen. It's all handed to you now. And you can apply the story of filmmaking to any other, anecdotally to any other thing in life. Oh, kids growing up don't have to do anything. They had, they didn't have the things that we had. It's just all of those coming of age tales all blend together, and it's become such a drag that while I enjoy the hell out of things like Obi-Wan Kenobi and The Mandalorian, and now Andor coming out and all that other stuff, and Rogue One, and how all those things fit in, and you could get young Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia in 2018, 2017, all those things. It just sort of makes me sad, because we bought Yoda as a puppet in a movie where now it's all CGI, Baby Yoda. And some of it's animatronic, and a lot of it's practical effects. And I want to see more of that. I want to see more people, do filmmaking to where they have to sort of make you believe, not just accept that, well, I can do this with a computer and it's done. I understand the doing, and Mandalorian actually did that. There's a shot where his ship's flying through space, and they did do that with a model where they did the motion control system, and they did all the old school ways, and you can't tell. In Iron Man, there was times where you couldn't tell if it was the practical suit that Robert Downey Jr. was in, or his the CGI and he's wearing underwear. In fact, they talk about it in the thing in the show where Jon Favreau is giving notes to them on something about the suit doesn't look right. And they're like, that's not the practical suit, John. That's CGI. We can just fix that real quick. They're like, oh, okay. Couldn't tell. Good job. Let's keep going. So it's I get it. I understand it. I'm for it, but I don't want us to have been given fire from the gods and then just misuse it. We need to use it to enhance what we're already doing. We need to develop that creativity. We need the creature makers. We need the model makers. We need the Phil Tippett's. We need those artisans don't exist in nature anymore, and I think that we're giving people too much technology that we're not going to have creative, movies. The storytelling is going to get lame and sad, and we need to have that. But that's just me. That's just how I feel, and that's not necessarily reflective of anybody else. But I bridge that gap. Those of you who are born in a post Lord of the Rings world don't understand. But those of us who were born before Jurassic Park or went to movies before Jurassic Park, we know. And you can't replace that kind of talent with a computer. You can enhance it, you can augment it, you can support it, but you should not replace it. All right, we've done all the things we can do. I really didn't do anything in between except for this because we went on a half an hour of it. But that's all for now. I want to thank you. I think we may be getting close. Like I said, we keep hitting that mark where we're going to get close. We're getting closer and closer, and I need to find something else to do, and we've got a lot of things we could be doing. So we'll, the writing is on the wall, model makers. Fallout Shelter may not be around for much longer. We'll talk to you next time. Don't want to scare you, but that's it. Have a good one. Take care of yourselves. Take care of the planet. Take care of each other. Take care of the old guard of movie makers. And we'll talk to you next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye.